My videos can be a little spooky, but you know what's more spine-chilling? Paying full price for something when there are coupon codes hiding in the shadows out there. They're not always easy to find, however. That's where today's sponsor Honey comes in. Honey is the free online shopping tool that scours the internet for promo codes and automatically tests them when you're checking out. Shoes, computers, video games, pizzas, whatever you're looking to buy, this virtual pot of golden goodness helps track down those discounts. Best of all, making those savings couldn't be simpler. Get Honey on your computer for free in 2 easy clicks. Then, whenever you're about to check out online, Honey pops right up, and all you've got to do is click the Apply Coupons button. Wait a few seconds as Honey finds a working coupon code, and if it does, watch those prices get slashed. Recently I had to update my microphone, since the old one was getting a little unreliable. Nothing takes you out of a horror story more than bad audio, let me tell you. Just by having Honey on my desktop, I saved a cool 20% on my new mic. So if you've got a computer, Honey should definitely be on it. Get Honey for free by going to joinhoney.com/lazymasquerade. Again, that's joinhoney.com/lazymasquerade, so they know I sent you. Thanks Honey for sponsoring today's video. Take a look at this photo. Just 3 goofy girls being silly for the camera and having a good time, right? Not quite. The girl on the right is Skylar Neese. She was senselessly killed by Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf, the 2 other girls in this picture, whom she went to school with and considered her best friends. In reality, Sheila and Rachel were warped, sadistic individuals. They had mutually decided that they just didn't like Skylar, and for no other reason than that, had formulated a plot to take her life. For months, they discussed how they'd do it, and even told some of their other classmates about their plan. They of course thought Sheila and Rachel were joking. During those months of preparation, they both continued to hang out with Skylar, pretending to be her closest friends, just like they were doing in this image. July 6th, 2012. At 12:30 AM, Skylar snuck out of her bedroom window to meet up with Sheila and Rachel. The pair had coerced her into hanging out with them that night through texts and calls. At first, Skylar was hesitant, but the duo weren't going to take no for an answer. Skylar got into the back of Sheila's 4-door sedan, and the 3 of them drove off to a spot where they usually relaxed at, just across the Pennsylvania border. There, all 3 of them got out the vehicle. That's when one of the perps told Skylar that they had forgotten their lighter in the car. Would she be a doll and go and fetch it for them? Skylar turned around and headed back to the sedan. That's when Sheila and Rachel counted to 3, their predetermined signal. On 3, they pulled out a pair of blades and rushed Skylar, tackling her to the ground and puncturing her more than 50 times. They continued until, in Rachel's own words, Skylar's neck stopped making gurgling sounds. Sheila and Rachel were pure evil, but they were far from evil geniuses. They tried to dig a hole in which to hide Skylar's remains, but didn't realize that the soil in the area was too hard and rocky to unearth. They planned this thing for months on end and literally fell at the first hurdle. Improvising, they instead covered Skylar with rocks and branches, then disposed of their clothes and went home. The following day, Skylar was reported missing. Sheila shamelessly helped Skylar's family distribute missing person posters, and later made this post on Twitter trying to cover her tracks. It eventually became clear that investigators were hot on their heels. Hoping for a reduced sentence, on January 3rd, 2013, Rachel confessed to what she and Sheila had done that fateful night. She led detectives to where they had hidden Skylar, and at last, the Neese family were given some modicum of closure. As for Sheila and Rachel, they were given 40 years and 30 years respectively. They'll both be eligible for parole in the not-so-distant future. This photo was taken in 1979 outside the Ghost Train attraction at Luna Park, Sydney. The boy in the photo was Damien Godson. He, his parents, and his brother had spent the day at the theme park, enjoying many of the classic rides. With their last tickets, the family decided to ride the Ghost Train. Before they got on, the mother, Jenny Godson, took this photo of her son and who she assumed was a park actor. This was the ghost train after all. Jenny then went to get some ice cream, while her husband and 2 sons went to enjoy the ride. When she returned, she noticed smoke billowing out from the ghost train. The ride had been completely consumed by a fire. 35 people were on the ride when the fire broke out. 7 of them never made it out, including Jenny's husband, John, her youngest son, Craig, and of course, Damien. How the fire actually started remains a mystery to this day. Some suspect it may have been the result of faulty wiring, while others suspect foul play. Abe Saffron, a notorious figure in the Australian underworld, was known to have started at least 7 other fires in the local area for his own gain. It's speculated that he may have caused the blaze as a way to get Luna Parks shut down. Saffron had apparently tried to buy the park several years earlier, but his offer was turned down. This may have been his way of getting revenge, or perhaps a way for him to purchase the park at a greatly reduced rate. Still, that's just speculation. Sometime later, when Jenny finally mustered the strength to look through the photos she had taken that fateful day, she came across the last picture that she had taken of Damien, standing alongside the horned figure. She recalled how that masked man had approached the family without saying a word, then silently placed his hand on Damien's shoulder. At the time, she had just assumed he was an actor for the ghost train. As it turns out, he wasn't. Luna Parks didn't employ any costumed actors. Given how creepy this photo is, and the fact that it was taken just before the fire started, there are of course those who think this masked man was behind it all in some way. Some even go as far as to say that he was some sort of demonic figure, an omen of sorts. I wouldn't go that far. But still, after learning about what happened to Damien, there's no denying this photo has an ominous vibe. There have been extensive efforts to identify this man in the photo. All of those efforts have failed. This harrowing, colorized image from 1913 shows a woman condemned to death in Mongolia. This type of punishment was known as immurement, which literally means walling in. It's been used as a punishment in various places throughout history, but by the 1900s was basically unheard of. Outside of Mongolia, that is. There, it was still being used to oppress protesters and quote-unquote troublemakers. What this particular woman did to deserve such a cruel fate remains unknown, but whatever the case, when she received her sentence, she was locked within this large crate and left in the middle of nowhere to slowly expire. The only food given to her would have been honey and other laxatives, which in turn would have attracted insects that would later feast on her carcass and lay eggs inside her. This food was given to her once a day, during which time the hole in her crate would have been opened. At all other times, that hole would have been plugged, leaving her in total blackness. It's terrible to imagine what her final days must have been like inside that wooden tomb. Hungry, thirsty, hot, scared, and alone. It doesn't bear thinking about. This foreboding image is the studio portrait of the Lawson family, taken just before Christmas in 1929. As you can see, they're all dressed rather fancily. Strange, considering they were a rural, working-class family. You see, Charles, the head of the household, had gathered his family together and driven them from Germantown to Winston-Salem, where he bought them all suits and dresses for their family photo. He explained this away as a Christmas splurge, a gift for the whole family to enjoy. In reality, it was all part of a dark plan he'd been brewing for some time. On the afternoon of December 25th, Charles Lawson sent his eldest son, Arthur, out on an errand which took him away from the house. Charles then calmly loaded his 12-gauge and sat alone by the family barn. As his daughters Carrie and Mabel left the main house to visit their aunt and uncle, he quietly waited for them to come into range, took aim, and blasted them down before bashing them both in the head. Immediately afterwards, he walked towards the main house, and, one by one, took out his remaining family members. His wife, who was sitting on the porch, his now screaming daughter Marie, his sons, James and Raymond, who were hiding inside, and finally, little Mary Lou. The eldest son, Arthur, soon returned to the house and found a crowd of people and officers gathered outside. They'd all heard the commotion. They found the Lawson family scattered around the property, with their arms crossed and rocks over their faces. Not long after that, they heard a final bang ring out from the nearby forest. It was Charles. He'd gone to the woods to end his own existence. It's theorized Charles sent Arthur out to run the errand, not because he had a deep love for his son, but because the stocky Arthur would have fought to protect them. Unfortunately, Arthur's story doesn't have a happy ending either. He was involved in a motor accident in 1945 and perished at the age of 32. Why Charles Lawson felt the need to spend a fortune dressing his family up to get their portraits taken days before slaughtering them is up for debate. In my mind, it's a sort of "we were here" statement. Photographs were a rare luxury back then, especially for working class people like the Lawsons. Charles wanted to leave behind evidence that he existed, and that his victims existed too. A final Christmas gift of sorts. More for himself than them, I'm sure. I guess his plan to be remembered worked, since because of this photo, we're still talking about him today. In the days after the massacre, Charles's own brother turned the house into a morbid tourist attraction and charged visitors to look around the house where his relatives met their untimely ends. I guess the concept of a caring family was lost on him too. Diving can be dangerous at the best of times, but cave diving is another beast altogether. Unlike during a regular dive, with cave diving, you can't just swim directly upwards if you encounter a problem with your equipment. You have to frantically make your way back through the rocky labyrinth you're stuck in. When your oxygen levels suddenly deplete and time isn't on your side, it's no wonder that under such circumstances, so many divers fail to make it back to the surface. Other times, divers simply get stuck in some tight passage or become disoriented and lost. The more frantic they become, the quicker their air supply goes down. Signs like this have been placed outside numerous underwater caves to try and prevent such loss of human life. You can't save everyone though. On January 8th of 2005, accomplished cave diver David Shaw swam through the dark waters of Bushman's Hole in South Africa. Bushman's Hole is an intricate cave, feared by even the most seasoned of divers, and has claimed several lives throughout the years. It had, in fact, claimed the life of David Shaw's close friend, Dion Dreyer, 10 years prior in 1994. Since then, Dion's body had remained in the cave. Now with 10 extra years of diving experience under his belt, David decided he was going to recover the body of his long-lost friend, Dion. A noble quest. Sadly, one that was destined to end terribly. Just like Dion before him, David entered Bushman's Hole and never resurfaced. Before embarking on the dive, David had attached an underwater camera to his goggles and recorded his entire recovery effort. This was one of the last images he captured on his ill-fated mission. The diving goggles of his friend, Dion. David had found his remains. From the rest of the footage, other divers realized what had happened to David himself. At a depth of 725 feet, he was subjected to immense pressures that made breathing extremely difficult. He then ran into more difficulties when Dion's body began to float. This was unexpected. Experts had told David that Dion's remains wouldn't be buoyant, but in reality, his body had turned into a soap-like substance, which did in fact float, making the recovery 10 times more difficult. While struggling to pull his friend out of the cave, David became entangled in the lines of Dion's body bag, and the physical effort to free himself, combined with how difficult it was to breathe, led to his demise. Both David and Dion were later recovered. This next set of photos comes from Reddit user Whitneyreneebee. Whitney's family live in a relatively rural part of Oklahoma. Last year, her mother was going through pictures on her phone when she came across 3 that stood out. One was of her husband, sleeping. One was of her youngest daughter, sleeping. And one was of herself, sleeping. They'd all been taken on the same night at around 3 in the morning. Nobody inside the house had taken any of the photos, and none of them had a history of sleepwalking. "I'm including all 3 pictures," said Whitney, "but the strangest one of them all is the pic of my mum. It appears as if whoever took the picture was kneeling down next to the bed, beside her, almost by her face. If you play around with the saturation, this can be seen in the background of one of the images. In the post, Whitney goes on to add that her family has 5 dogs that all bark at the slightest noise. None of them made a peep that night. The thought of someone else, or maybe even something else, being in your home and taking photos of you while you sleep is, ironically, enough to keep anyone awake at night. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work of alternative R&B artist Frank Ocean. For those of you who don't know him, he's made some of the most critically acclaimed albums in the genre and has an extremely dedicated fanbase. That being said, he's notoriously private, and very little is known about his personal life. As such, even if you have heard of him, you probably didn't know that back in August of 2020, Frank's brother Ryan, 18, was sitting in the passenger seat of a car being driven by his friend Ezekiel Bishop. As the two of them drove through Thousand Oaks well above the speed limit, Ezekiel lost control of the Tesla. The vehicle collided with a tree at high speed, was cut in half on impact, and burst into flames. Both Ryan and Zeke perished immediately. After hearing the news, Frank rushed to the scene in his GT3. This image shows Frank Ocean sat on the side of the road in a state of complete shock, having just learned that his brother was gone. He sits below a speed limit sign, adding a chilling dimension to the image. Frank and Ryan were both extremely close. Ryan's voice is even featured on the track Futura Free on Frank's 2016 album, Blonde. Knowing that this is what became of him, it's ominous hearing his young voice pop up at the end of the record. Frank also later released a track called Orion, dedicated to the brother he lost. When we're young, we all have a tendency to be reckless. We feel invincible, and unfortunately, some of us pay the ultimate price for that. This image is a chilling reminder to drive responsibly. This happy-looking couple are Zach Bowen and Addie Hall. They started dating in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and seemed to be at their happiest during that period, where there was no electricity, no bills to pay, no work to be done. The pair of them were free spirits, and the lack of responsibility they felt during that period was something they savoured. Eventually, life went back to normal, however, and with it came the stress of actually having to work, both at their jobs and at their relationship. To make matters more difficult, they both had their own personal issues, which I won't go into detail about here. In short, their pasts were bleak. As real life started to take a hold, the pair began to fight constantly. When Addie learned that Zach had cheated on her, that was the final straw. On October 5th, 2006, she went to their landlord and tried to have Zach's name removed from the lease. The landlord refused, saying that the pair of them had to work out their relationship problems together. That landlord would be the last person to see Addie alive. 12 days later, on October 17th, the authorities in New Orleans received a call from the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel. A man had leapt from the roof and splattered on top of the parking garage. That man was Zach Bowen. He had perished on impact. In his back pocket, they found a note in which he stated he had jumped from the roof to atone for what he had done. Investigators went to Zach and Addie's apartment. The air conditioner was on full blast. Zach had spray painted messages on the walls, like, "I'm a failure," and "call my ex-wife and tell her I love her." In a pot on the stove, they found Addie's cooked head. In a separate pot were her feet and hands. In a roasting tray in the oven were her arms and legs. They'd been seasoned and cooked. Chopped carrots and potatoes were found on the counter. Addie's torso was found in the fridge. In a journal, Zach had left an explanation about what had happened. He wrote about how he had had his way with the remains, how he sliced her up in the bathtub with a hacksaw, and how he went back to work like normal the following morning. In fact, for the next 2 weeks, Zach went on with his life like nothing had happened. All of his friends and family noted that he was extremely happy during this period, the happiest they had seen him in a long time. In actuality, Zach had already decided to jump from the Omni Hotel's roof, and, as he wrote in the journal, was just enjoying his last couple of weeks on Earth. There was no evidence to suggest that Zach had actually eaten any of Addie's remains. This innocent-looking photo of the couple together during happier times becomes morbid when you know what ultimately became of them both. After the incident became public knowledge, a woman named Mary Voodoo Queen Milan leased Zach and Addie's apartment building and turned their room into a real-life horror attraction. She dressed the place up like a schlocky haunted mansion, complete with bride and groom Chucky dolls, and charged visitors to step inside the room where a man had cooked his own girlfriend. Her attraction is still in operation to this day. Seven months ago, Reddit user OopySpoopyMan made a post on the r/ghost subreddit titled, "After hearing taps and noises from my kitchen, I take a photo and see this." They later wrote, "Thank you to the ones who have shown concern. As an update, since seeing this, I've been packing some stuff and preparing to go and stay with my family. I've told my flatmates that I'm going and why I am, but they've chosen to stay there." We'll end this video with a truly horrible photo. The Filipino Zoo Girl. Her name is unknown, but she was a member of the Igorots, a tribe in the Philippines. This photo was taken sometime between 1904 and 1914. Not even the Library of Congress, who own the photo, know exactly when. The Philippines was being governed by the US at the time, and this little one, along with other members of her tribe, were taken from their home and displayed at the Coney Island Zoo alongside the monkey and lizard exhibits. As you can see, she was bound, and visitors threw peanuts at her. Unfortunately, the concept of a human zoo was far from original at the time. Throughout America, Europe, and Asia, it was common to showcase people from conquered and occupied nations. Natives would be taken from some far-off land and displayed to the public like some sort of exotic trophy. This was done to drum up support for government policies overseas. The message was clear. Look at these people. They can't possibly be expected to govern themselves. And that's exactly the message this little one was being used to convey. She and the other Igorots were placed inside a closed-off pen. Then, dogs from the local pound were brought in for them to chop up and cook in a stew, all to shock and intrigue those who paid good money to see them. This was the mainstream entertainment of the day, and it both scandalized and intrigued the so-called civilized patrons of the zoo. "Look at how these people live," they'd say to each other. Of course, that wasn't actually how they lived. The people putting on the show displayed the Igorots how they wanted them to be perceived. The reality was very different. This colorized photo shows how Igorots actually dressed at the time. As for why they tied this little one's hands, it was probably to dehumanize her. If she were free, she'd likely be running around and playing. That would have made it difficult to convince people that the Igorots were so different after all. Thankfully, this particular image does have a happy ending. The Igorots were eventually returned to the Philippines after the man who had brought them to the US, a guy called Dr. Truman Hunt, was put on trial for not taking adequate care of them. He was found guilty of that charge, along with stealing from them, using physical force to intimidate them, and for refusing to bury two of them who had perished on the journey to America. Dr. Hunt only received 18 months. And on that note, I think we all need a break to cool off, so we'll end things there. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who participated in my Discord emoji competition. We had some great entries, and I just want to shout out some of the best ones. Catation, Soul Chimera, The Hungry Kitten, Masha, Existential Dread Taco, Modius Vivendi, Yami, Shinobu, and the overall winner, Hannah. Also, a huge thank you to my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters. Alex Greensall, Azrael Warakai, Charlie Lackey, Connor Louthan, Crawford K. McDonald, Expand Ong, Gina Valera, Gracearchie, GreyWhiteRabbit, Infamous-senpapi, Leonardo Martinez, Lord 210, LucasManiac, Mira Lancaster, Monica Mendoza, Native Beauty, Nadine, Peter Loggerach, Philip Westra, Procupidine Natter, Ronnie Franklin, Sarah Ramirez, Silas Geist, Sloane Crawford, Taylor&Monica Gruenk, The Only Dorita, Ms. Crypto, Mrs. Yvonne Rankin, Amanda Hansen, Boise McSnatchy, Lydia Glassley, Yoshi6500, Patrick Rusecki, Hamish K, and Phantom Knight. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, it really helps the channel out. Anyway guys, be sure to smash that like button or I'll smash you. Make sure the bell icon is turned on, and you'll be hearing from me again very, very soon. Until then, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.